Wellness Rhythm Show. Find your rhythm. Live your wellness.
Y'all, let me tell you, last spring I decided I was done with the whole eat 6 small meals a day thing. I was exhausted just planning it. So a friend suggested intermittent fasting, and honestly, my first reaction was, is this just skipping breakfast with a fancy name?
Which, to be fair, Emma, is not entirely wrong. But here's where it gets interesting. The research behind intermittent fasting is actually far more substantive than most diet trends. We're talking Nobel Prize level biology. Yoshinori Osumi won the 2016 Nobel Prize in Physiology for his work on autophagy, the cellular cleanup process that fasting can trigger. So no, it's not just skipping breakfast.
Nobel Prize. Okay, you officially have my attention. So today we're digging into intermittent fasting, what the science actually says, who it genuinely helps, and whether it's realistic for real people with real lives.
And just as importantly, who should probably steer well clear of it, because nuance matters here.
So let's start simple. For anyone who hasn't heard the term before, what is intermittent fasting actually?
Right, here's what I've learned. Intermittent fasting, or IF, isn't really a diet, it's an eating pattern. You cycle between periods of eating and periods of fasting. No specific foods are required. It's about when you eat, not necessarily what.
Which is honestly what drew me in. I wasn't being told to give up cheese. Nobody's taking my cheese.
The most common approach is the 16-8 method, 16 hours fasting, 8 hours eating. So if you finish dinner at 8 p.m, you don't eat again until noon the next day. You've essentially skipped breakfast and had an early lunch.
See? Fancy breakfast skipping. I wasn't entirely wrong.
You were 30% right, which in wellness terms is almost heroic.
I'll take it, so let's dig into the science of it. What is actually happening in the body during that fasting window?
Right, let's unpack that. After roughly 12 to 16 hours without food, your body depletes its glycogen stores, that's stored glucose, and shifts toward burning fat for fuel. This metabolic state is called ketosis, loosely. More importantly, that autophagy process Osumi studied kicks in. Your cells essentially start recycling damaged components.
So your body is doing its own housekeeping.
Exactly. And research published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2019, led by Dr. Mark Mattson at Johns Hopkins, found that this metabolic switch has associations with improved blood sugar regulation, reduced inflammation, and even some cognitive benefits.
Okay, I want to flag something though, because I think this is where people get confused. Associated with is not the same as definitely causes, right?
Brilliant point, Emma, yes. A lot of intermittent fasting research is observational or conducted on animals, or involves relatively small human samples. The evidence is genuinely promising, but we should not overstate it. Dr. Mattson himself is careful about that distinction.
Here's the thing though. I actually tried the 16-8 approach for about 10 weeks, and I noticed real differences in how I felt by week 3. Less afternoon brain fog, more consistent energy. Is that the science, or am I just telling myself a good story?
Possibly both, to be honest, but there's a plausible mechanism. Stable insulin levels during the fasting window can reduce those energy spikes and crashes. A 2021 study from the University of Alabama, led by Dr. Courtney Peterson, showed that time-restricted eating improved insulin sensitivity in men with prediabetes, even without weight loss.
That's huge, because we always bundle fasting with weight loss, but that's a separate conversation.
Completely separate. And this brings us to one of my genuine hesitations about how IF gets marketed. The weight loss results in clinical trials are real but modest. A 2022 study published in the New England Journal of Medicine found that time-restricted eating produced no significantly greater weight loss than standard calorie restriction alone.
So if someone's only goal is weight loss, it might not be the magic bullet?
Correct. If it helps you naturally eat less because your eating window is smaller, great. But the window itself isn't metabolic magic for weight specifically.
Y'all, this is exactly why we do this show, because the headlines never tell you this part. And hey, if this kind of nuance is useful to you, please do hit like and subscribe. We are on a mission to be your most trustworthy wellness friend, and it genuinely helps us reach more people.
Right, and speaking of reaching people, let's talk about who this actually works for, because our audience is beautifully diverse. We've got people in their 30s juggling kids, people in their 50s managing parents and teenagers simultaneously, pre-retirees, active seniors.
The sandwich generation is real, David.
It is. And interestingly, the research shows potentially meaningful benefits for that older demographic specifically. A study in the journal Cell Metabolism by Dr. Walter Longo at USC showed associations between fasting protocols and improved markers of cardiovascular health, particularly in adults over 50.
That said, And I want to be really clear here because I feel this strongly. If you are managing any health condition, on any medication, or have any history with disordered eating, please talk to your doctor before trying this.
Non-negotiable, particularly for anyone on diabetes medication, blood pressure medication, or who is pregnant or breastfeeding. Fasting can interact with these in meaningful ways.
Okay, so let's say someone's listening and they're a generally healthy adult who wants to try this. What does realistic look like?
Start with a 12-hour fast. Most people are already doing 11 hours between dinner and breakfast without realizing it. Push it to 12. See how you feel for 2 weeks. Then if you want, extend to 14.
This is what I wish someone had told me. I jumped straight into 16, ate, and spent the first week convinced I was going to die by 11 a.m.
Hunger is surprisingly adaptive. Research from the Salk Institute shows that ghrelin, the hunger hormone, actually adjusts to your eating schedule within about 2 weeks. You stop being as hungry during your fasting window.
That was genuinely true for me. By week 2, noon felt completely normal.
One practical note, black coffee, plain tea, and water during the fasting window are generally considered fine. They don't meaningfully break the fast for most people's purposes.
Okay, so here's where I want to push back a little, because I know you love the efficiency angle. For some people, especially women, especially parents, there's a social cost to eating patterns. My kids eat breakfast. I like eating breakfast with them. That matters.
That is a completely legitimate concern, and actually the research backs you up. Dr. Krista Varadi at the University of Illinois, one of the leading IF researchers, has written about the importance of social eating and finding flexible protocols. There's no evidence that 16:8 is superior to, say, a 14:10 window for most people's health goals.
So do the version that fits your life, not the version that sounds most impressive.
Precisely. And that's actually the most evidence-consistent advice you can give. Consistency over intensity. The research shows adherence is the single biggest predictor of outcomes.
There's also one more group I want to acknowledge. People for whom this is not appropriate, full stop. Anyone with a history of anorexia, bulimia, or orthorexia should approach this with extreme caution, ideally in consultation with a therapist and doctor together.
Absolutely. Some evidence suggests structured fasting can trigger or reinforce restrictive thought patterns for vulnerable individuals. Dr. Carolyn Costin, a leading eating disorder specialist, has written specifically about this risk. It's real and it matters.
We're not saying don't try it. We're saying know yourself, know your history, and get support if you need it. Okay, so if you're walking away from today's episode with one thing, let it be this. Intermittent fasting is a legitimate, research-backed eating pattern with real benefits, especially around metabolic health and cellular function. But it's not magic, it's not for everyone, and the best version of it is the one you can actually sustain.
Right, here's what I've learned from all of this. Start with 12 hours, see how your body responds, and ignore anyone selling you a rigid protocol as the only way. The science supports flexibility far more than the wellness industry would like you to believe.
And whether you're in your 30s trying to get through the school run without crashing, or in your 60s thinking about long-term metabolic health, there's a version of this conversation that's worth having. With your doctor, with yourself, and apparently with us on a Tuesday.
Do like and subscribe. We'll be back with more evidence and considerably less suffering than Emma's first week of 16:8.
Y'all, he's not wrong. Thanks for spending this time with us. We'll see you next episode on the Wellness Rhythm Show, your most informed, most honest wellness friend. This show is part of the VoxCrea.AI system. If you want a show like this for your organization, without building it yourself,
go to VoxCrea.AI and request a sample episode.